Before we get into any specifics, wonderful film. It touches you where it's supposed to touch you. It really makes you feel connected with history. How did you guys meet? What is your connection before we get into the movie itself?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, my youngest son, Clayton, he was film studies was his major in college, and he's the co-producer on the film. He's also an actor. He's gotten more into real estate now, but he was a child actor and did a lot of acting and has a lot of connections in the. He lives in Los Angeles, so he has a lot of connections in the entertainment business. And the two of us, along with some camera people, we've made 2 trips to Belgium and Germany to film a lot of footage at the locations where the events took place in the book that I wrote. And then he wanted to do a filming of me. I'm the narrator in the film. So we had all this footage and didn't know what to do with it. And so my son Clayton reached out to Michael, and we just dumped all this footage on him. And then he put it all together to come up with a documentary short. And he did a fantastic job.
Oh, no, absolutely. It really, really flows. And now, at first, there is a mention of War in the Pacific. And obviously, because, for history buffs, people have to understand where this started for the United States of America. And so from that point forward, then it focuses back to Europe and your relationship with your father and what happened in Belgium and northern France. And I think the biggest surprise for me was actually seeing you meet the gentleman who shot down your dad's plane. That is just surreal. How did that happen? You don't just Google who shot down my dad's plane. So how did that happen?
Well, yeah, all my dad knew and all the military knew is that my dad's B-17 was attacked by 2 German fighters, Focke-Wulf fighters, and shot him down. And I thought that's all I'd ever know. And one day when I was in the midst of doing research to write my book, my wife just casually asked me, well, why don't you try to find the German pilot that shot down your dad's plane? And I'm thinking, well, what a ridiculous idea. She doesn't know what she's talking about. She's naive. It'd be impossible for me to do that. But like a good husband, I did what she told me to do. I did first go on Google, just type in trying to find a Luftwaffe pilot. A couple forums came up, which I joined, and I posted inquiries on those forums because I knew the day he was shot down, the time of day, the location. And in a week, 2 guys got back to me. A guy from Belgium and a guy from England. And on that day, there were 12 B-17 shot down, and the one shot down south of Sionainn, Belgium, which is right at the French border, was shot down by Hans Berger. And fortunately for me, Hans became a translator after the war and speaks perfect English. So I interviewed him for the book, and I've actually found out that the gunners on my dad's B-17 shot him down at the same time. They shot each other down. He had to bail out. And I just can't express how excited I was when I found Hans Berger's and then was able to interview him for the book. For the book, I just interviewed him over the telephone and through email. But I have been to Munich, Germany twice since that time and met Hans, and we've become friends. And actually, Hans is the only person in the shot down story that's still living. He's 96 years old now, and we've become good friends, and it's just an amazing experience to be able to have found him and learned more from the German side of it.
Right. Actually, that was going to be my next question because I'm from that generation as well, who's grown up around war heroes, uncles and aunts who were involved in World War II with the Free French and so on. And there's only one person left. My uncle, who's 98, he's the last person around. So the fact that Hans is still around, that was my next question. He's still around, isn't he? That's quite amazing. 20 years ago, we still had veterans everywhere. For World War II, it was easy to find. Now it's getting pretty difficult. And as you mentioned in the film, I guess one of your greatest regrets is not having your father talk more about it. And I just want to ask you, do you have the same feeling I have with this generation, that those who spoke the most about what they did the least, and those who didn't talk so much actually did the most?
Oh, yeah, I agree with that. Like most World War II veterans, my dad didn't talk a lot about the war. I knew the basics growing up. I knew he was a B-17 pilot. He was with the 8th Air Force. His plane was named the Susan Ruth after my oldest sister, who was 1 year old at the time that he went overseas. And he flew bombing missions over Europe, and he was shot down in February of '44. He was missing in action for 7 months, but he evaded capture. But it wasn't until 1989 when a memorial was erected to my dad and his crew in the little village of Mackinoise, Belgium, where his plane came down and he bailed out. Where the memorial was erected, and he and the other 3 crew members that were still living at the time went over for the dedication. And there he was reunited with all these Belgian people that hid him during the war, and visited these homes and farmhouses where he was hidden. And that brought it all back. And he started talking about it after that. And then my first trip to Belgium, I've been there 6 times, was in 1994. And that's when it became personal for me, because I saw all those places firsthand and actually met a couple of his helpers. That generation, they looked at it like they were not heroes, you know, they just had a job to do. Their country needed them. They went, fought the war, did what they had to do, came back to America and got on with their lives. They didn't look like they were heroes or did anything out of the ordinary. They just said, I was just another guy that went over there and did what we had to do to fight for freedom.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's exactly what we hear. Now, each country in Europe has a favorite liberator. That's obvious. Like, for instance, Canadians, if we go to the Netherlands, they just are crazy for us. I know in France, it's more Canadian and American. And if I understand well, Belgium was mostly American, or was it also Canadian and so on? Can you specify this relationship between different countries and American versus other allied powers?
Well, I think it's the area of the country, because in the area where my dad was shot down, there's a memorial to some Canadians, and there's about 12 or 13 different memorials for different events there. And so I think it's predominantly American, because there were a lot of planes shot down over there, but they still recognize the Canadians and the British. And I would say I've been to France and the Netherlands, and the Netherlands is like Belgium. Those people are still unbelievably grateful and thankful for the Allies liberating them from Nazi oppression and Nazi occupation. And they do a great job of educating their younger generations to remember the importance of those events as well. You know, they were occupied. They knew what it was like to live under tyranny and the Nazis. In the United States, you know, we just take all these freedoms for granted and don't realize the price that has to be paid to maintain them.
What I want to understand is the purpose of the movie, obviously, is to tell a story, a very specific story. But do you hope that a film like yours could be picked up in the educational system that is shown to young people today? Do you hope there's some demand for that in the educational system today in the United States, or do you think it'll just end up more in the history buff circles?
Well, that's an excellent question. Besides the book, you know, I go to, well, except for this year because of the coronavirus. In most years, I travel all around the United States, attending air shows, signing copies of my book, and I make lots of presentations and do a lot of speaking. And really, it's my mission to remember and honor and educate, to remember the air war over Europe, to honor the men who fought it, and then to educate the public about it. Because as you mentioned, you know, the World War II ended 75 years ago, and it's fading in people's memories. And you know, it's my goal is to try to prevent that. The younger generations, you know, really don't know what took place. It's not taught that well or that much in school today. So, you know, I do what I do to try to preserve that memory and to educate younger generations, and hopefully I can achieve, you know, some success in doing that, so it isn't just forgotten.